Hi everybody, Nate here from WASD20. Welcome back. I've got some Reaper Bones miniatures here today, and we're going to be taking a look at how various paints do in applying to various Reaper Bones surfaces, and doing a little testing here trying to answer the question, do you need to prime your Reaper Bones miniatures, and what paints work best with Reaper Bones? So I wanted to make just a brief video demonstrating how paint goes on primed and unprimed Reaper Bones miniatures. So what I have here is I have several different kinds of paint. First I do have the Reaper paint. This is their MSP, Master Series paint. And I've got Privateer Press paint. And I've got some Citadel paint. And lastly I've got some Vallejo Game Color paint. I wish I had blue in all three, but I don't. I have blue in these three, and in my Vallejo paint, we're going with a dark. It's dark flesh tone, so it's a dark brown. Now, in terms of my miniatures here today, what I've got is I've got two that are pre-primed. This one is primed in black. This one's primed in gray. They're imperfect, but they're good enough. And then I've got these two right here. This one right here, I scrubbed in a little bit of warm soapy water. And this one right here is just straight out of the packaging. These are both from Reaper Bones 3 Kickstarter. So we're just going to do a sort of a scientific experiment here just to see. But the striking thing that we found the other day is the difference in paint and how that matters for the Reaper Bones. So I think the first thing we're going to do is we're just going to put a little bit of paint on each one of these. I will be able to paint over them later or remove the paint, whatever, no big deal. But we're going to start with the Vallejo Game Color, do the brown. And I'm going to be watering it down to a consistency that I would be comfortable painting with so as not to have it clumpy looking or cloud the details. Always thin your paints. Alright, so the first one we'll do is actually the black primed one here. So if I'm gonna have to try to find a good spot here. We'll try his leg here. This one is primed in black. And you can see the paint goes on quite nicely. Might have had a little too much on my brush for just getting a little dab here. But anyway, you can see that that paint does go on quite nicely. The coverage is very good. All right, let's try the gray. Now my gray primer I'm not going to be using anymore because I've realized it just comes out, it always comes out tacky. It must just not be the right kind of primer. These are both spray primed, but you can see that, okay, it's not covering very well, but it's fine. It would just need several coats. My paint is pretty thin, so that would just need several coats. No big deal. So pre-primed seems to go on just fine. This one right here, let's go next. We'll go with washed. We'll go with most treated to least treated. This one right here, the Vallejo paint. Okay, so you can see right there a little bit. I'm covering it, but it's not going on very well. It's kind of shrinking out of some areas that I am covering, and overall leaving lots and lots of white. Not looking great. And let's try our completely untreated here. Okay, and you can see really shrinking up a lot. The paint is actually like disappearing from areas that I have already painted. Okay, so I'll do a zoomed in view here and you can see that there's a bubble right here. And once again, if I paint this, paint over it, you can actually see the paint kind of disappearing from areas that I have already painted. So again, this is totally unwashed and unprimed, and that is Vallejo Game Color. All right, now let's try some of the other paints here and just observe how they do. And I'll probably speed through this part and just kind of give my comments on how it does. But we're going to go with the Citadel paint next. This is kind of a light blue here. Citadel paints are a little thicker, so you're definitely going to need to thin it out quite a bit. All right, so on this guy, primed in black. You know, again, thin, but it seems to be going on okay. Take some coats. Let's try the gray. Same thing here. Seems to be going on okay. Let's try this one. This one has now the washed but not primed. We'll try this upper section of his cape up here. Not so good. And you can see, you know, how shiny these bones are, but yeah, it's definitely, it's going away from some of the areas I've already painted. It's like a wash almost, going right into the recesses and skipping some of the areas that I'm painting that, but it's not covering. Let's try the same thing with this guy here. And yeah, that's just terrible. Okay, so this is a Citadel on an unwashed Citadel paint on the unwashed, unprimed Reaper bones. It's almost impossible. All right. Next up, let's try the Privateer press paint. And we'll get a little of this. This is Privateer Press. This is the P3 Formula P3 Signar Blue highlight. It's a nice bright blue. All right, and we'll start with our werewolf, which is just the only one I happen to have around that I think is primed. Okay, so it goes on totally fine. You know, again, take a few coats, but it goes on pretty well. Next, we will go with our gray here. Yep, goes on quite nicely. No problems. Next, we'll go with our washed but not primed. A little more water in this paint. Not good. Not good at all. Same problem we've observed on others. And lastly, our completely untreated, straight out of the box Reaper bones. Unpaintable. All right, lastly, we're going to try our, this is a very dark blue. It almost appears black unless you're painting over white, so just be aware of that. That's just the only blue I have in the Reaper paint, but it's kind of a midnight nightmare black, it's called, so yeah. But it is slightly blue. All right, now it will probably not show up too well on our werewolf here because he's already black and this is so dark. Reaper paint I found requires very little thinning, this MSP paint. But let's try painting part of the underside of his arm here. And I can tell, I don't know if you can, that it's going on quite well. There's no problems in coverage. Next up, we'll go with our primed gray. And we'll do this part of his cloak up here. And it's going on very nicely. No problems. All right, next up, we'll try our washed but not primed Reaper bones material. And, oops, I got a little too much paint there. Take some off there. But you can see it goes on pretty well. There's no problems that I observed with these other two blues at all. It seems to be covering quite well. I'll take a few coats once again, but it's covering well. And now, lastly, this is our completely untreated Reaper bones. And you can see we are observing some of the same problems. Now maybe I have it thinned too much. Some of the same problems that we had on our other one, but not nearly as bad. it is paintable. Still, I would recommend washing them. Now, I am going to show you one that I did the other day that was better. You can observe the same sort of thing here. This is the Reaper paint, completely unwashed, this one. Completely unwashed. Reaper paint and the Vallejo paint, which I did paint this whole piece here, and it just almost completely disappeared, whereas the Reaper paint almost completely covered it. You can see that that raised edge did lose paint. So in terms of conclusions from our little experiment here, there are 3 major conclusions that I think we can draw from what I just did. Firstly, if you want to get away with not priming your Reaper Bones miniatures, one, I think that washing them does make a difference. Based on the 2 that I painted that were not primed, the one that was washed did take paint a little bit better. Secondly, I think that MSP paint is the only way to go if you want to get away with not priming your Reaper Bones miniatures. You really need to get this Reaper MSP paint that is specially formulated for use on the Bones material. Thirdly, priming does make a difference, a big difference. And if you want to get away with using any paint, even a cheap craft paint, which I have used on Reaper Bones in the past, priming them is what you need to do. Priming them will allow them to take any paint quite nicely. I would argue that the Reaper MSP paint even goes on better when my miniature is primed. Now, I do recommend that you take my results and my advice here with a grain of salt because of this fact. In this experiment, I only used one color from each paint line, and I actually have found in the past that there is a good degree of variation between different colors even within one paint line. For example, my dark brown in Vallejo game color today that I used covers a lot better than my light brown does, my more khaki color. So that's just something to be aware of, and it would have made it a much stronger experiment, my results more trustworthy, if I had used more colors within each line. But I didn't want to take the time and just get crazy with 12 different kinds of paint today. If you are interested in checking any of this paint out, any of the products that I'm using today, I'm putting Amazon links down in the description below. Definitely recommend checking those out. And Reaper's website is a really good website if you're looking to make a large order of Reaper Bones miniatures or paint. Their website does have some really great prices. Lastly, if you have any comments or questions, I welcome those down below. If you have experience with some of these paints and miniatures and some of the things that I talked about today, I always love to hear more experience. I think the more information people have, the better. So definitely put your own experience down in the comments as well. That would be greatly appreciated. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you give it a thumbs up. And if you're interested in learning how you can support WASD20, I will put a link to my Patreon account right up there. I want to thank you so much for joining me. Everybody take care. You'll see me again very soon.